Hello and welcome back to Hell Fortress Cathedral Midnight, the ENOCHIAN Terror Transmissions. Today we are being graced with the presence of the world's greatest writer, at least as her website proclaims, June Martin, whose short stories and comics can be read on worldsgreatestwriter.com and Blood Knife. June is a writer of strange, satirical, twisted fiction and pretty hilarious comics, which she posts on her Twitter at I'm June Facts. June and I ended up talking about the Isabelle Fall controversy, the strengths and drawbacks of working on analog art versus digital art, the importance of actually finishing your projects instead of waiting for them to be perfect, the ridiculous, childish philosophy of accelerationism, and the weird world of actually trying to get your shit published. Enjoy! Hello!
Hi.
How you doing?
Not bad.
It's good to hear. Welcome to the podcast, June. It's nice to get to talk to you.
Thanks, it's nice to be here.
I've been reading everything basically that you have up online, and it's been a fantastic journey. And I was glad to hear in recent, in the past few weeks, or maybe it was a month, I don't know, time doesn't mean anything anymore, that you've gained quite a bit of notoriety from your latest story posted in Blood Knife.
I think technically it's a story. You could also describe it as like a polemic. So what it is it's a response to what happened with a story called I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter, which was a story written by a trans woman named Isabelle Fall, which it had a pretty basic premise, like, okay, well, what if someone took like this right-wing meme and like the military actually made someone's like gender into attack helicopter.
It was a pretty fantastic piece of post-apocalyptic, like cyberpunk existential horror, like the helicopter people fighting airplane people that had become airplanes because it would give them the right to move their families away from the climate devastation zones. Like, it was... You don't get a sci-fi story that good every day.
Yeah, it was an interesting story, and I wish it was still up, but a bunch of people started crying about how awful and terrible this story was. Many of which did so purely based on the name, which was a right-wing meme that Isabelle Fall was like playing with.
And if I'm not mistaken, most of the people who were upset and who led the charge against this essentially harassment campaign and this blacklisting of this new writer were publishers.
Yeah, there were a lot of people involved who are publishers who are involved in publishing, some of whom are editors at prominent genre mags. It was awful. The biggest name, of course, and the one who I call out directly in my piece, is N.K. Jemisin, who used her massive platform to support the harassment mob, and then admitted that she hadn't read the story. So this terrible, harmful piece of art, which, by the way, I didn't read.
Yeah. It's broke-brain zombie behavior. It's pure. I don't even want to call it puritanical. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's this strange fervor. It's like Robert Anton Wilson's Fnords, right? There's some phrases or words that people, when they see them, they shut down and they can't critically think and they just react.
I think ultimately part of it is just that the material incentives of the sci-fi and fantasy community reward this kind of behavior. It is true that you can rise to prominence by attacking problematic art. And it turns out, with that incentive, there's no real competing incentive to be careful about who or what you do it to.
Yes. And I've noticed this on not just sci-fi fantasy, but amongst tabletop role-playing game Twitter as well. It almost seems to be the cheat code to gain followers is to seek out people and root up anything you could consider problematic and just start shit. And if you can't find anyone, you make a hot take that people are going to disagree with, and the shit will come to you. It's this very, very strange thing. But your story is in, very June Martin style, who is the world's greatest writer, by the way, as her website proclaims very truthfully. You have decided to create a kind of recursive degeneration of this concept, and your article story polemic was called "I sexually identify as the I sexually identify as a attack helicopter controversy," which is fantastic. Is there anything you want to say about kind of it almost seems just like it's really interesting because in some of the things that I've read by you, it seems like you have this knack for taking this kind of the force of inarticulate rage and articulating it in a very literary and compelling way.
Basically, the concept of this story is that it is someone who is trying to transition into being the event of the I sexually identify as attack helicopter controversy. I wrote it 10 days after I had bottom surgery. So I don't even remember very much about writing the first draft. All I really remember about it is just feeling like I unhinged my jaw and just poured venom out.
The process of editing it down from that first draft, how was that from that kind of venomous eruption to what it is now? Is it very different?
It's pretty close to what it was. Partly because I am a fairly lazy editor. So there aren't actually any major changes from the first draft to this one. Just a few, tinkering with wording a bit. In fact, the biggest change from where it was on the page to how it is on Blood Knife is in the block quotes that have certain CSS text effects. And that was something that came from the editor of Blood Knife, Kurt Schiller, who had the idea of okay, let's take these quotes and let's do something interesting with them. And it turned out amazing.
Yeah. Blood Knife. I really like how Blood Knife are kind of experimenting with form a little bit. That's the kind of shit we used to get on the internet before everything got pared down to 2 or 3 websites. We used to get people actually playing around with form and making cool shit.
God, I want to get off the 3 websites so bad.
Yeah, I made my own website, but I never fucking update it or actually use it. That is the problem. You can make your website and feel yeah, I'm a punk, and then just kind of never do anything with it.
Yeah, honestly, I am more inclined to do paper zines than really do something strong with my own website, because at least that feels like more of a break to me.
Hell yeah. Those kinds of things are really, really fun to work on, for sure. Which I had a question related to your writing style, which we can circle back to. But since you mentioned paper zines, you also do comics. And comics is a really interesting art form to me, because I always wanted to be a comic writer when I was growing up, and I could never quite get the art right, and I've worked over the years with many, many comic artists and stuff like that. Very, very difficult to see a project through to completion. How has your journey been with comics? Have you always wanted to write and draw them, or did you start off wanting to be more of an artist or more of a writer?
So I've always loved comics. I kind of weirdly or not weirdly, I don't really know anyone else's experience, came to comics first from the little newspaper funny strips, which are all terrible. Right. They're mostly awful comics. But then I started off writing, especially in high school. I with a friend I wrote some comics because I couldn't draw at all. And kind of ran into the same problem that you have, which is like it's very hard to get to completion. It's hard to collaborate consistently with people. So I started drawing my own, and they were terrible. Just god-awful. Both artistically and writing, because I was in high school. And then I ended up taking a long, long break from comics, like over a decade, and only really came back to them at the beginning of this year, where I sort of like, okay, this is a thing that I love. It's an art form that I love, that I really want to participate in. I just need to sit down and do it. So I did one little quick one, and it felt amazing. So I just started like trying to just like churn them out as much as I could, which luckily, since I've been trapped inside for a year, has been a not huge amount, but like considerable.
Yeah, I'm surprised that there isn't a huge amount there, but I'm surprised that this all came from that it all came from this 1 year, because there is quite a bit there. And something that is notable is your art style is very developed and unique. So even though you weren't doing comics over all these years, have you been drawing?
Off and on. So I stopped doing comics really consistently when I was like 19. I kept drawing on and off into my early 20s, but I had a very unfortunate sidetrack with alcoholism that basically stopped me from doing anything for a few years. Drawing and stuff was something that I would like try and come back to over the years, but had a few false starts, and it has only really been this year that I like came back to it and started giving it as much attention as I have.
Drawing, for me, I've always found it difficult because, when you're starting off and when you're trying to find your style and stuff, I don't know, I think I've had that kind of like internet content creator capitalist mindset in my brain since I was a little kid in the 90s. Every time I drew a picture as a kid, I was like, how am I going to sell this? How am I going to turn this into a story that I could show to as many people as possible? And the fact that I like couldn't draw for shit, like totally just made me just hate it over time. But I do find it interesting now with the advent of webcomics and like Twitter art and stuff like that, is that there are so many different art styles that people can be exposed to. And there are a lot of people who get really, really big doing very, very rudimentary drawings. And I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, like it does sort of fit that sort of like zine and punk comics mentality of like, comics work with bad drawings. Bad drawings get comics done. Which is a phrase that I encountered earlier this year that I am enthralled with, because it's true. A finished comic with bad drawings is so much better than an unfinished comic with good drawings.
That's such a great phrase. I never even heard that before, but that resonates with me so much, because I've been working on like a video game for years that has all this intricate pixel art and stuff that is just taking forever to finish. And like 3 or 4 months ago, I was like, fuck it, I'm going to do doodles and make a whole game out of doodles. And now it's finished, and I'm going to put it out in like a couple of days. So yeah, that is so true. That is so true. And I've said similar things to like musician friends of mine who have been really, really struggling to release their albums because it's not perfect, right? And my ethos, the thing I've always said to them is like, as long as you're not embarrassed for people to hear it, it's good enough.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, like, I think the most important skill I have as an artist or writer or whatever is I will do something, I will give it a pass, and then I will put it out there and move on to the next thing. Because even if that thing isn't as good as you would like it to be, spending the same amount of work like tinkering with something versus starting a new project, you will get better just going through the process of doing like new thing after new thing after new thing versus like trying your hardest to get this one thing perfect.
It's so true. And I think one of the biggest skills that someone can develop as an artist, which took me almost 25, 26 years to do, is to learn how to utilize your resources without crushing your imagination. Because I remember when I was in like film school and stuff, the resources were super limited, and I could just see in my head when I tried to make stuff to my resources, shitty student films, right, where nothing happens, and to actually figure out how to take the big cool ideas in my head and pare them down to something that can actually be done one way or another has been really, really, really difficult. And some people just never seem to get that. And I wish that was something that would be talked about more in like art classes and stuff like that, because it's very important, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to take a grand vision that you have for something that would be perfect and let it go. I'm actually dealing with that right now. I am working on a comic for a zine, and the deadline is April 20th, and that is not enough time for me to do it the way that I like perfectly imagined it.
Is that the stuff you've been posting the drawings for in Write Good? Because they're very high quality.
Yes, but I had a vision of sort of like how I was going to color it. That is not going to happen. So I'm going to have to settle for probably like pretty basic coloring or toning or whatever I end up doing. I haven't decided yet. And that's fine. It's better that I get it finished than I miss the deadline for it and it doesn't get to be part of the thing that I really want it to be a part of.
Definitely. And do you prefer to color by hand or digital? As if like you don't use your hands to color digitally, but you know what I mean.
Okay, so this is the thing about me. I hate computers. Especially when it comes to art, I get a tremendous amount of satisfaction from it as a tactile, physical experience of like learning to use these like physical materials to create these effects. In a way that like digital work is not satisfying to me, because it's like pointing and clicking to make a color is faster, but it doesn't have the same feel as like doing an ink wash over something.
Yeah, it's underwhelming. I've only just gotten into painting in the last couple of years, and last winter or the winter beforehand, I don't remember which, I made a zine by hand, like an RPG zine, just with like markers and pens and stuff, and that was so satisfying. I'd love to do more stuff like that, but as you said, computers are just so fast and so convenient, and you can make something and then you can put it online and then people can buy it, and it's very addictive.
Oh yeah, and to be sure, it has its strengths. Like whenever I do an art commission, I always do it digital, just because in that case, I'm doing something to someone else's specifications, and there are always little like fiddles and changes to be done, and digital is just a way better way to do it. But for the most part, I am trying to get the computer out of my process as much as possible.
Well, more power to you for that. You got any ambitions for like long form comics or like a regular webcomic kind of thing? Is that something in the back of your mind, or you just playing?
God, I just don't have time to do a regular webcomic, especially because the way that I work is that I have cycles of like intense enthusiasm about a project, and then I'll set it aside and go work on something else, and that is not conducive to a regular schedule. But actually, right now, one thing that I have set aside while I've been working on this comic with a deadline is like a 30-page comic that's not too far off from being done. And that's probably around the length that I'm going to be kind of like playing in for the foreseeable future. At least the next thing after that is going to be another... I think the next one after that is going to be, I think, a 24-page comic, but all of the drawings for that are going to be way, way, way more detailed. So it's going to take much longer.
Excellent. Can you tell us anything about the 30-page comic that you've nearly finished, or do you want to keep that as a complete surprise?
Oh no, I'm happy to talk about it. So this is a comic called Confluence, And it is about a trans woman who's like years into transition. She's got all the surgeries done. She looks the way that she's going to look. And there's just no excitement in her life because she filled her life and made her sense of purpose out of transitioning. So now when the comic starts, we are with her at that point where she's just kind of like listlessly like sleepwalking through life, and she sees the Facebook profile of someone who looks the exact same as her, has the exact same name as her, and has pictures with a bunch of friends. And the comic is about her like tracking down and finding this doppelganger, and her like eroding sense of self as she does so.
That is so good. I love how in your like between this and another story that a story that I read by you that isn't out yet, which we probably won't go into any details with until sort of it comes out. But AFAB, you have this like almost really sly and satirical way of almost tapping into like a TERF's mindset and twisting it around into like a trans perspective and exploring it in like a super uncomfortable way that will like unsettle every single person who reads it. I think that's fucking incredible.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, honestly, TERF's extremely weird takes on gender that they have to like contort themselves into to make their position tenable. Those weird contortions are interesting, but TERFs are just so dumb and so hateful that they can't use them to do anything fun.
It's a perfect cosmic horror of these people's minds, for sure. Another thing that I've noticed about your writing style is that, or that the conceptual kind of grounds that you play in, like you do go for these like really witty satires, like Notorious, where a man digs up the corpse of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and wears it in order to try and save America. Mwah, fabulous. But something that I feel like, how do I say this? I wanted to make an analogy about death metal bands and how like some death metal bands have like really have this one really amazing album that like defines their style and they continue on after that. But kind of everything before that, you can see the shadows of that that perfect album in it as they build and build and build. And I feel like the style that you're working towards in some of your work is this like playing around with like recursion and like entering a story a few layers of recursion in from something like weird repeating or something beginning to degenerate. Like in AFAB, it is like this complete like abstract of an abstract of an abstract of a concept, and in I sexually identify as an attack helicopter concept. It is literally a recursive iteration. It is from the perspective of a recursive iteration of something that's already happened. And God, there was another one. My brain is going blank. But yeah, these weird, unique concepts that seem to be within decay and iteration and corruption that you're playing with. I'm super interested in where that style came from and where it's going. Like, am I completely off the mark here?
No. So one thing that's interesting to me as a general exploration is what is an idea someone can hold that is so poisonous it will ruin their life? And for given values of ruin, for given values of poisonous, for given values of like good or bad or weird or whatever, but I love a character who has an idea that is like weird or complex that they cannot wrench themselves away from.
Yeah, literally in the case of that one story where the guy like crushes his own skull to try and make himself more powerful. Oh, that was great. Yeah, like I loved in AFAB how there's no catharsis available in that story.
Nope. The only thing that story offers is discomfort.
And that's fantastic. And that's what people hate these days. No one seems to want art that's designed to make them uncomfortable. No one seems to want art that they can't figure out, that they can't like puzzle box like rearrange into something comforting and something that makes sense. And that is something about your style that I'm very excited to see. I wanna read more stuff that I can't like. I love Italian horror films, and Italian horror films never make any fucking sense. And if you try to make fucking sense of them, it's just not gonna work. It'll make you think about some really cool stuff while you try to do it, but you're never gonna get there. And do you have any kind of like influences writer-wise? Like, who would be your favorite writers, and what would be some of your favorite books that I don't know if like I'm asking if like this directly influenced this style you're working in, or just general, because like people's influences can be really surprising sometimes. Anyway, I'm babbling. Go on ahead.
Okay, so the biggest influence on me, like number one with a bullet, is Jorge Luis Borges. Like, I'm very frequently riffing on something Borges has done, or working on an idea that like I got inspired by from reading him. Just because he is, like, his is like the galaxy brain fiction par excellence. Like, it is all there. I don't know if I would, and then like I don't know if I would call her an influence, but Paris Green, also known as Frog K, is just one of my favorite working writers right now. And yeah, I cannot possibly talk up her fiction strongly enough. It's fantastic. It's the funniest. It's like the funniest, darkest comedy I have read in my life. It's beautiful.
Paris Green is like a nuclear powerhouse. Like, everything she seems to create seems to spark entire like genres. Like I read a couple of her works, and I immediately wrote my own story, right? Because it just, I was like, what, you could do this,
Yeah, like everything she writes is just electric. It's amazing.
Is there a Borges book that you would recommend to people in particular to start off with his stuff?
Yeah, I recommend you start with the collection Ficciones. Ultimately, there aren't that many short stories that he did. You can't really go wrong. A specific favorite of mine is... Oh, I can't even remember... I forgot the name of the short story, which is embarrassing because I love it so much. But it's about a guy who is trying to rewrite Don Quixote word for word by becoming someone who would write Don Quixote.
That's incredible. Does he like try and live like he's in the past or something?
He tries that. He tries drugs. He tries like a bunch of things, and it's told from the perspective of someone sort of commenting on and reviewing and just like talking up his work, which is a very Borges move of someone writing like, okay, here's how Cervantes writes this passage, and it's a passage from Don Quixote. And then here's how Pierre Menard writes it, and it's the exact same words. But then the reviewer's like how sublime this second one is.
That's excellent. I really, really want to read that now. That sounds really good. So I'm just curious, just because it's a cliche to kind of like talk to a writer and call their ideas like unique, but your creative voice is one of the most interesting that I've come across in quite a while. And I'm interested, like, when you were younger, when you were just starting to write, what kind of concepts were you sort of playing around, if you can kind of remember what your early kind of creative drives were like?
Honestly, a lot of them were kind of, like, they were boring ultimately, but they were very, like, internal, sort of, like, okay, this is a character whose, like, perception of the world is warped by, like, this quality, like, by depression, by anxiety. And I know they didn't work super well, but I eventually realized that, like, oh, the way to make this work is to make the thing that is sort of like warping their reality is like make it ridiculous.
Right.
And specifically like increase the tension between how ridiculous this concept is versus how seriously they take it versus how seriously the story takes it and the consequences thereof.
Awesome. And have you written many like books over the year? Like I know like lots of writers kind of just have full ass novels that they've written just lying around that they've never kind of either gotten published or tried to get published or anything like that. Have you had a similar experience in your journey as a writer?
Yeah, there's a couple that are just sitting on a hard drive that will never see the light of day.
I always find that very interesting. What about them? If it's not too like shameful for you, what about them stopped you from just made you go, that's enough, I'm not touching this again?
I mean, so for the first one, it was just I wrote it. I took a couple passes at it, editing it, and I was like, there's just not enough here to turn for this to be what I want it to be. So I just had to sit down and be like, okay, this was a learning experience. That's good enough. The second one was during the 2016 primaries, I wrote a satire which took as its premise, what if someone such as Donald Trump won? Oh my God. And the book was largely correct. Wow. But it's also, that's not something that we need. We know what would happen if he won.
Yeah, wow, that's frightening. To have written that and to see play out in reality, very very Sutter Kane in the Mouth of Madness type stuff. You writing a book about Donald Trump getting elected and then him getting elected sounds like one of your stories. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I also discovered that satirizing Donald Trump is pointless because to make the story work, my main character was actually a much more reasonable person than he is.
Yeah, that era of history is like this insane singularity point of ridiculosity and horror all meshed together in a way that just cannot be comprehended, satirized, or you can only just sort of like either try and block it out from your memory or just behold it as the like Cthulian abomination that it really was.
Yep, and the move is definitely not satirizing it. It doesn't work. There have been no Trump satires that worked for good reason. So that one in the vault, never to see the light of day.
That makes a lot of sense. So you do have a novel that you've been working on for a while and been talking about for a bit that sounds very interesting, called Accelerate,
yeah.
Which you seem to be a lot more pleased with and excited about. I'd love to hear a bit about it.
Yes, this one will see the light of day. So I started over like the course of 2017, I wrote much of the first draft of this, which is a story about a like young, or I mean, I guess not that young, probably like 30 years old, leftist who like is so fucking sick of the revolution not happening and comes to the conclusion that the reason why it's not happening is because the conditions of society aren't bad enough to make people want to revolt. So he independently sort of arrives at the idea of accelerationism, which is, you know, the worse things get, the more the contradictions heighten, and then the closer you get to revolution. So he reconnects with his rich conservative family, as many young white dude leftists have. Not that many, but like not an insignificant number either. And tries to essentially do it himself. He's trying to like recast himself as like a conservative like businessman and ideologue and make things worse. And as the story goes on, and as he sort of succeeds in making the world worse and like driving it into chaos, the book itself structurally dives into chaos faster and faster and faster as well until by the end it's not really doing any kind of like realist storytelling, and before that there are little things like a character like changing names or something. Basically the novel breaks down.
That's really, really interesting. So God, this is a difficult. The idea of like narrative decay is a difficult thing to talk about. It is one of my favorite elements in fiction ever. Like, as I said, I love Italian horror movies. I love Lucio Fulci. His movies sometimes ended with the film literally being torn apart. I love when the narrative, like the literal narrative and the meta narrative, kind of like tear each other to shreds. If you don't, at risk of like getting the spoilers and like blah blah blah, is there anything you can say about kind of how you're tackling that, other than like someone's name changing, which is a great early sign of something going wrong? Like, are you going for a kind of House of Leaves method where the text itself is like falling apart as well as the story? Are you bringing in genre elements? How is that sort of working?
So I am just kind of making it so that as it starts up, things start being like weird about scenes, like words repeated too often, like forms repeated too often. And eventually it kind of gets to the point where the thing that I'm describing could not literally be true. So in some cases I'm playing with form, or like going like full on like Burroughs cut up in one scene.
Nice.
And in other cases I'm just like pushing the events of the story into surrealism. Trying to like mix those up unpredictably as well.
Cool. So stuff like intentional plot holes and things like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Accelerationism is also a really interesting thing to explore from a satirical lens, because I feel like it's something that people dunk on a lot online, and people see it as this ridiculous kind of foolish, cruel, puerile kind of ideology, but there, I don't, as far as I know, and I'm sure I'm wrong because the internet's a big place and culture's a big thing. There hasn't been a hell of a lot of fiction, or at least English language fiction, that has actually dealt with the perspective of like an accelerationist in a kind of a satirical way.
Yeah, unfortunately, he is kind of like a vulgar accelerationist in that he's just a guy who like has this idea and doesn't investigate it too much. Unfortunately, because the novel just has so many events to cover that all of the fat of it has been like completely trimmed off, and it's still like 90,000 words.
Wow.
And yeah, and like I don't want it to be any longer than that. So there's no room for him to sort of like actually like delve into and grapple with like accelerationist philosophy, which does exist and is
awful.
It is a lot.
It's not good. It's very seductive to a certain type of person.
Oh yeah. But
it's so fucking stupid. Like a lot of these accelerationists, like, man, they talk, they all have the same tone of voice. Every accelerationist talks like they're a misunderstood genius lamenting like the failure of their great projects without ever having produced anything of value or insight. It's insane how they all seem to work to cultivate this tone of voice. And a lot of the ethos seems to, because these accelerationists, at least online accelerationists, don't actually seem to be accelerating anything. They just seem to be like saying at once that leftists are weak and puny and like, babies, but also they're everywhere and they're coming to get me.
This is the thing, is that like accelerationism has built within itself a great opportunity to be the perfect contrarian, because it's like, oh, you think this is bad? Well, it's actually good for acceleration reasons. It's a very easy move, and you get to feel really smart while you do it. But like a lot of people and this isn't unique to like leftism or like accelerationism, because like there are too many people that arrive at various anti-capitalist positions like anarchism, communism, accelerationism, all of these purely through contrarianism, and it is annoying.
Yeah, it's like it's like the annoying Randian Satanists. They're just Christians. Like, but yeah, contrarianism is screw you, mom, screw you, dad, writ large across everything, for sure. Now, I'm interested now. So publishing, right? Getting short stories and books published. It's pretty brutal. I mean, everybody knows this, but like, when it comes to Accelerate, do you reckon you're going to try and send it to big publishing houses, get agented, or are you going to go for more of a self-published kind of thing? And how are you feeling about that kind of thing?
So, I mean, part of my viewpoint is that this is a experimental novel about a specific like leftist like piece of leftist political ideology. So I know where I'm at. I do have like query letters out to agents. I've sent it to some small presses. I am planning to do more of each of those things, just because I think those are the best paths to getting an audience for it, especially because I am not someone who has like I don't have a very like substantial readership built up of people who are like following my work specifically. More than I did like 6 months ago, which is nice, but it's still not huge. So having the platform of a traditional publisher would be very helpful with that.
It is interesting because, like, Accelerate inherently it's got some inbuilt kind of publisher turnoffs in there, but you do get these books that come out every now and again, more frequently than not, from my perception, I could be wrong, that are that strange, and they get super, super lauded for being that strange, and people talk about them forever, and they get great, great reviews. And I just gotta wonder, like, what is the difference between, like let's put aside the idea of quality, right? Because I'm sure there's lots of people who try and write weird books that are just bad, right? Well, like, what is the difference between a good book of a good experimental, strange piece of fiction that does get published and doesn't get published? Like, is it representation? Is it agents? Is it connections? Is it pure luck?
I mean, connections are always a factor. It's easier to get an agent if you're somebody's friend or somebody's like niece or nephew or whatever. Part of it is, some of it is just luck. If you catch an agent or a publisher like in the right mood, and if they're like, I think I can sell this, then you might be in business. Whereas like the person who just tried with something experimental might have struck out. Ultimately, it's hard to say why some things make it and some things don't. I wish I had more insight into the publishing industry. I feel like it would be super useful to me right now. But it very much does feel like, it does still very much like look to me as like this like big black box where decisions get made and outcomes come out, and I can't predict how it's going to happen.
It does feel incredibly arbitrary. And what do you think of the potential of self-publishing? Like, I see, obviously self-publishing can be kind of cringe, right? There are those accounts that just publish, that are just like, hashtag self-published writer, hashtag writer, here's my book, here's the cover of the book, and it's just very generic, and there's nothing really going on with their presence other than all these books that they're constantly posting that really don't look very appealing at all, that I think gives self-publishing kind of a bad name. But on the other hand, when you get really good self-published writers like Paris Green, who, as we've said before, is this like electric powerhouse that seems to generate culture from almost every word that she writes, but it doesn't have that much of an audience and isn't making as much money as like a published author would be making, that's kind of disheartening to me personally. What do you think about the potentials of self-publishing?
So, I don't want to sound like more down on self-publishing than I necessarily need to be, because like I've self-published a short story already, Listomania, and honestly that made me like over $100, which isn't too bad. I think like Gretchen Felker Martin self-published some novellas, and that helped her build a readership, and like they're good as hell. I think self-publishing is useful, and it's especially useful for like queer writers and like trans writers, especially because even as like trans lit explodes a little bit, we're getting more opportunities than we used to, but not that many, and there are just like a bunch of us that are never going to get publication because we're doing stuff, especially when we're doing stuff that just isn't like doesn't work for a cis audience.
Yeah, they want the trans stories, right? They don't want, they don't want anything else. Really, it's the stories that they can like pick up as like, I'm reading the trans book, I'm a good ally type thing.
Yeah, and like, but you know what? Self-publishing isn't a bad move. Like Tori Peters, the author of Detransition Baby, which is the new like big trans book, and it's excellent. And even though it is very much like a trans book with a capital T, before that, her big works were like 2 self-published novellas, both of which are excellent. Like I can't. It works. It is a good way to get your work out there, which is better than it not being out there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think personally, like I've had like zero success with self-publishing, but like I think a really, really smart thing to do for anyone considering self-publishing, it's something I've tried to do with everything I've self-published. Get really nice cover art. Like get super nice cover art that's like unique. Find like a cool artist on Twitter. Get them to do your cover art. Don't post these like generic like fantasy paperback photo covers. Like even if you fail, like I have every time I fucking self-publish something, you'll have a really nice fucking book on your shelf at the end of it.
Yeah, like I mean, yeah, like so, yeah, like for Listomania, I am lucky in that I can do my own art. I was actually I was working on art to pair with I sexually identify as an attack helicopter controversy when someone contacted me like, hey, I want to publish this, before it got picked up by Blood Knife. I was at that point totally convinced that it was destined for self-publishing.
Right. What was the image that you were going to represent it with? Because that's a really abstract story.
I was going to represent it with a like feminine-looking chest with the words like attack, 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 just like sort of like very aggressively tattooed like down her sternum.
That's cool as hell.
Yeah. Of course, on Blood Knife, it got paired with this amazing picture of like helicopters surrounding this like ambiguous explosion, and I love it.
Yeah, very action movie for sure, which pairs well with the like, that kind of venomous eruption that is the actual piece, for sure. Well, we've been going for just about an hour, and thank you so much for coming on. This has been really, really interesting conversation. I'd love to talk to you again next time you have something cool out.
You too. Thanks for having me on.